Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Power BI Dev Camp that's run by the amazing Ted Patterson. This is session 9, and it's Advanced Dataset Programming with Power BI. Hi, Ted. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I mean, we learn so much from you. And we wanted to just quickly remind people that you can register for MBAS or the Microsoft Business Application Summit. And I'm going to actually put that link in the chat before we start. So reminding everyone to go there and see all of the awesome Power BI and Power Platform and D365 offerings that we have. So there'll be some new announcements, some really cool demos. It's just going to be amazing. So thought I would put that in the chat and remind everyone to please register. And another friendly reminder with some housekeeping here. We just want to make sure that during our calls, Ted, you're going to be answering some questions, but letting people know that they can put those questions in the chat, and then we can answer those. And I think, Ted, you'll be taking breaks after each section, yeah?
Yeah, we'll pause. And I think you're pretty good at making me pause, and we'll take questions. And there's a big yellow screen every time we finish one section and go to the next. So
okay, awesome.
When you see the yellow screen, you hold me down. Don't let me move forward till we make sure we empty the question queue.
Thank you. And Daniel, our producer, is also here. So thank you so much, Daniel. And on with the show, Ted. Thank you, everyone.
Super. Well, first of all, thanks for attending, whether you're here live or listening to the recording later. So what we're going to look at today is advanced dataset programming with Power BI. And so before we get started, what I want to do is kind of quickly remind people that for Power BI Dev Camp, we do have a portal at powerbidevcamp.net. So you can get information about our sessions. If we refer to a code sample or something like that. Once again, we try to just kind of make it a place that you can go to find the things you need for the Power BI developer arena. Now, today we're going to look at one particular set of code. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be showing you how to program, with the different APIs. There's going to be 2 of them we're going to be looking at today, but all the code that I put into a simple C# console application. The idea is that if you're interested, you'll be able to download this. I have a place where you can change out things like the application IDs and any type of data that will switch from each of our environments. And the idea is that hopefully it's not just you looking at what I'm doing, but for those of you who are interested, you'll be able to download and kind of use this as starter codes in your project. Okay, so what we want to do is let's start with this high-level overview, of dataset programming. And this is probably the most important thing to get across to people, is that when people think about programming datasets in Power BI, what comes to mind is the Power BI REST API. That's the original API that debuted along with the Power BI service, and it's been available since 2015. What a lot of people don't know about is the new kid on the block, the new kid named Tom, the Tabular Object Model. Now, when we program Tom, we're really going through the XMLA endpoint, and we're basically programming against data sets that are running in the service. Now, the Tabular Object Model has been around for many years before it was integrated into Power BI with SQL Server Analysis Services and Azure Analysis Services. But just this January 2001 is when they took their integrated support, to also program it against Power BI data sets, and they went GA and made it, generally available. Now, as I look down here at this Venn diagram, what are the things that we do with the Power BI REST API? And, if you've been coming to Power BI Dev Camp sessions or you've been programming with Power BI before, using the REST API to create workspaces, enumerate through workspaces, deal with Power BI embedding, setting data source credentials, that type of stuff, that still all works. But now the Tabular Object Model is going to bring a whole new set of capabilities. So let's say you just want to walk up to a data set and run a DAX query and get the output and, basically build into a CSV file so you can have your own custom, import into Excel. You want to clone data sets that are just sitting there, or I want to take a data set that's there and I want to modify it. I want to add a new table. I want to add a new measure. I want to enumerate through every table, every column find every column based on date time and change its formatting. Also, this gives us a new opportunity to automate creating roles, role level security, RLS roles, and to be able to assign users and groups to those. That's been a big, ask from our customer base. Also, we are kind of at the beginning of being able to have a multilingual way to create Power BI reports using something called translations. And the Tabular Object Model, gives me the ability to, write a piece of code that takes a PBIX file that just has US English and to basically add a set of translations to it so that we can create multi-language reports. Another neat thing that we're going to do today, is to show an example of replacing the M code for a table partition. And when we get there, I'll kind of motivate, one of the customer scenarios we had that kind of led us to creating that. And finally, there's always going to be this overlap, so you could create a new data set, with either of these APIs. You could update parameters, you could start refresh operations, so there is some overlap. But I think what's important is that Power BI programmers learn about both APIs. And several tasks that I'm going to show you today are going to have to draw upon both of these APIs to complete one particular task. Okay. Now, because I'm assuming that more people have heard of the Power BI REST API, just a quick high-level look at Tom. Tom is basically a .NET library, and it's part of the Analysis Management Objects, or AMO, client libraries. And just gives us a programmatic way to connect to a data set and look at the data model behind it. And, whether I'm just reading or whether I want to, make some modifications. Okay, so a little bit later in this session, we'll get a little bit more involved and we'll look at some code that uses Tom. Now, whether you're using the Power BI REST API or you're programming with Tom, before we can, call into Power BI and start programming data sets, I need to interact with Azure AD and get an access token. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this session because this is a deep topic in and of itself, but there has to be some code that gets an access token. In the session today, we'll talk about acquiring access tokens that are user-based so that when I call into the Power BI REST API, I do so, under the identity of a user and with the permissions of that user. It's also possible to get an access token under the identity of a service principal. And that gets to be very popular as ISVs and large enterprises start working with something like Power BI embedding, being able to kind of run things, without having to have a human account, without having this risk that when I authenticate, I'm going to get some dialogue to pop up and ask me for, some type of code that it's sent to my phone because we have multi-factor authentication. So there's lots of motivations that we have for running a service principal. And everything we're going to look at today, you're going to be able to run this code, as a user or as a service principal. As I mentioned, there isn't going to be a lot of time here that I'm going to go into the security aspect, but there's this one particular class, which is Token Manager. And this allows me to get user tokens and app-only tokens, if I go down here. And here's something that's really neat. There is, this set of delegated permissions. And so when we get an access token for a user, there has to be one or more user-oriented permissions, what we call delegated permissions. So what you'll see is that when you program and you ask for an access token for a user token, part of your request passes this string array. And here are the permissions that we have, in Power BI. Now, what I want to do is up here, let's kind of go ahead and look at one of these and notice that it's HTTP analysis, Windows.NET, Power BI, API. And then that's the first part, that's the resource ID. And then we have the permission at the end. What's really neat is that both Tom and the Power BI REST API use the same resource identifier. Why is that neat? Because I can get an access token and then I can use it to call the Power BI REST API, and I can turn around and use the exact same access token to call Tom. Okay, you might not think that's cool, but I do. Let's keep going here. Now, let's say that you wanted to call the Power BI REST API but you're not using .NET, or you're using .NET, but you like to program in a low-level way where you create your own URLs. So here's an example of what it takes if you're not going to use this friendly assistant that we're going to see in the next slide, which is the Power BI .NET SDK. It's just a matter of you constructing URLs and also, having to deal with the access token and put it in the authorization header. And so if you're using .NET, whether it's old .NET or .NET Core or .NET 5, there are versions of the Power BI .NET SDK. And without this, your code has to deal with constructing the URLs, adding the authorization header with the access token, and then you also have to deal with getting JSON result sets back and somehow consuming them from whatever language you're using, and also packing JSON bodies that we send in requests. Now, when we start using the SDK, we just have a friendly set of wrappers there. And what I want to kind of show here, just to kind of illustrate at a high level, if you look at the code on top, doesn't use the SDK. You look at the code at bottom, does use the SDK. Which one, requires less code? So once again, if you're using .NET, that's great. Obviously, if you're using something like Java or Node.js, or you're writing Apex code in Salesforce, you can't use .NET code. So, at that point, you really do have to kind of knock it out by, parsing together the URLs and doing all the things to, basically execute HTTP requests and harvest the responses. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to use kind of the easier way. And once we get an access token, what we're able to do is just create this Power BI client object. And once you create the Power BI client object, we have very friendly methods, like report.getReports. Okay, now, when we talk to the Power BI REST API, that's the first thing we're going to look at. Let's differentiate between the user APIs and the admin APIs. And this really has nothing to do with user versus service principle. It has to do with when you run a command, can you only see the workspaces in which you are a member? Or can you see every workspace regardless of whether you're a member or not? So when you use the user APIs like get groups, you only see the things, of which you are a member. And when I basically use the admin APIs, we're going to have things like get groups as admin. And what that does is it gives you the potential to see every single workspace in, the Azure AD tenant that's hosting Power BI. The Azure AD tenant, what you might call the Office 365 tenant, is the top level in a Power BI environment. So when the administrator wants to get a report on every single workspace, so we can catalog it, take inventory, we use get groups as admin. Okay, just to kind of see an example of these two, here are the two different APIs back and forth, and maybe this would be a good time to, jump in here and do a demo. So let's say that I go back to my Power BI environment, and you kind of see that, here, I've created a tenant, which is a workspace. Let's go ahead and create a second one. And I do a lot of work with customers that they create workspaces, one per customer. So we kind of refer to these as customer tenants. Okay, but now you can kind of see that I have these two workspaces right here. So let's go back over here. And what I want to do is let's go ahead and kind of look at this hello world code. Maybe I'll explain a little bit about the sample code here. So everything kind of starts with the program class. So there's a whole series of demos that I'm going to write right here. Now, we have a couple different classes. So the first one up here is the dataset manager. So that is using the REST API as a user. I'm going to demo that first. Next, I'm going to demo dataset manager service principal and start running the same code, but as a service principal, instead of a user. And then we'll have dataset manager Tom. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to run this code right here. And the first thing we're going to do is get the Power BI client. And note that here, we're always kind of asking for a particular permission set. So once again, you can see here that, sometimes I just need an access token that has workspace read all. Sometimes I might need to read the assets, inside of a particular data set or workspace. And we're going to do a lot of work where we're creating things. So this is going to be kind of the main permission set that I'm going to be using, which I'm going to call tenant provisioning. Okay, so given that, let's go ahead and in Dataset Manager, we're going to run this code right here. And I won't do this the whole time, but just to begin with, let's bring up our friend Fiddler. And, let's go ahead and run this right here. And what you can see is, first of all, that something looks strange here. Display workspaces. What did I do wrong inside here? Okay. Give me 1 second here as I get the egg off my face. Let's go back down here. What I'm going to do, I think there's a little cache. Okay, now that we have this right here, let me go ahead and run that one more time. And I know what the problem is. Okay. Hopefully you'll think this is funny, but I took this and I made a copy of it to put it up to GitHub, but I forgot that this is the app settings where I blanked everything out. So I have to change back. Okay, that's Ted's senior moment for the day. Let's go back to the one, where I have ready to go here. So we'll kind of go start at demo 1. And once again, we have the 2 different methods we're going to look at, display workspace. And so what's this going to do? It's just going to go do a get groups. So let's go ahead and run this. And, now that I've run it and I get groups, I'm a user and I can see 2 different workspaces. But then we also run the second one right here. And the second one is going to be get groups as admin. Now, when you call get groups, the one that's not the admin, you don't have to pass a top filter. But when you call get groups as admin, because potentially you could be in an environment that has, thousands of workspaces, they make you specify, what is the top number. Now, also, you might not want to see things, that are deleted. So what you'll find here is that, here are all the workspaces, and this will show you workspaces that you own, as well as workspaces, that are owned by others. It shows you, I don't have any V1 workspaces, but it would show you V1 versus V2 workspaces. And if I go back here, let's do this. Let's go ahead and kind of get rid of this filter inside here. So what happens if I run this? And I've been playing around with this environment for a couple days, creating and carrying things down. And now you're going to see that there's just a ton of other workspaces that have been deleted. So once again, using get groups as admin, gives you a lot of control, over the things that you'd like to see. Okay. Now, let's get further into programming data sets. And so let's say that I want to use the Power BI REST API, and we have a lot of customers that are creating environments for Power BI embedding. They're using the app owns data model. And so they have this issue where, they have a certain number of customers, and each customer has a certain number of users, and they want to create a workspace and basically, grow out that workspace for each customer. And we want a way to kind of automate the onboarding process for a new customer, in creating what I'm going to call a customer tenant. Now, here's an example here where I want to create a workspace, and you're going to see that we have this older name. Now, if I go back to this demo, let me get back here for a second. And what I want to show here, back inside of the project, is that we have these methods for creating workspaces, getting workspaces, deleting workspaces. Also, because I wanted a demo, every time we have a tenant, a new customer, it's going to have a name. But let's say there's several pieces of information for the way I've set up my environment. So each customer has their own database server and their own database. And the idea is I have 100 customers, or 2,500 customers, and everyone has the same SQL database schema for their database instance. They just have different records. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a template file, and we're then going to upload this template file and redirect to the database for that particular customer. Now, also, one of the steps is that you're going to have to refresh credentials. So if you basically upload a data set, point it to your customer database and try to do a refresh, it's never going to work, if you haven't set the credentials. Okay. So once again, when you see Power BI tenant, that's not part of any API. That's just the sample. I've decided to model tenants. So it's going to be easier for me to, to basically upload a bunch. Okay. So let's say that we comment out demo 1, and, let's go now look at number 2. So here, let's say that we have a workspace, and, we'd like to take a look at that workspace. So if I go back over here, so I have this workspace, and once I have created this workspace, let's go ahead and upload a new PBIX file. So what I want to do is I kind of want to show, how we can discover a file that has been added. Okay, so here we basically are uploading a PBIX file, so we get a new data set. If I open the new data set, in a new report, I can see it has like a sales table and these tables inside. Okay, so we have this tenant name, tenant 01. So let's go ahead and name that, tenant 01, and then what is the name, of our data set? So our data set, is named sales. And if I go ahead, and run this right here, one of the things that I would like to get, okay, Ted is not on top of his game today. Let's make sure that I have that name correct, and that I have sales inside there. Yeah, workspace ID. Okay, and maybe what we'll do here is let's go ahead and, what I like about the console application is let me go ahead and run this. Okay, and now we'll kind of move into the code right here. And so, here we're going to, get a Power BI access token. I didn't mean to jump into that part right here, but let me jump out of this code, which is security code. Once again, didn't mean to jump into the code that's doing that. But let's now finally get back to where we were, and we've got the client. So now we're going to, look for a particular group. Note as you're working with this, some of these things take OData filter strings. So making sure you're able to, to work with those inside here. And here you can kind of see that, we've got the object back. Now that we've got the object back, we want to get the data set in question. And so in our case right here, we're through there. We can look through the data sets. And, note that when you query workspaces, they let you pass a filter, but they don't let you do that for data sets. So there is something, about this that you just kind of get used to working with it. And, arguably workspaces is when there could be many, and you want to kind of put a filter inside there. Okay, somehow I am not getting the right data set inside there. I think I must have the name spelled incorrectly. But yes, okay, so if I go back here, one more time, Ted, let's go back here, and it is wingtip sales. And this time, what I want to show is, let's get rid of this breakpoint and put a breakpoint here. Is that, let's say I want to get information, about this particular data set. So now as we step inside here and we call get datasets, in group. Once again, one of the things I do kind of regularly, is I'm using this higher level API, but, behind the scenes, it's translating my code into these URLs. So things that I can see, from this call inside here, is one, there is the access token. Okay, here's a cool little trick. If I right click on the access token in the authorization header and say send to text wizard, and I have from base 64, notice that I can look down here and kind of see what's in the access token, including, I can see where is the scope. So there's all the permissions, that I have baked into my access token. It's just one of those things where if you're troubleshooting, it's not working, make sure that, your access token, has the right level of permissions. And so here, I've got a 26 minutes late for dev camp. Oh gosh, Kelly's gonna be really mad at me. Anyway, let's keep going here. So now, we find the data set in question. And so at this point, I'll just go ahead and run it to completion right here, just to see, inside, what are the things that we want. And if I remove that, and then we'll just hit the Control F5 right here, just to run it in a way that it will pause when it's done. You can see that, what do you want to figure out? Who's the owner of the data set? So there is a configured by property. And that really you can think of as, who is the owner of that? Is effective identity required? Does a gateway become necessary to refresh it? Things like that. Okay, so now that we have seen that, let's keep moving on here. And so let's go ahead and move to number 3 here. And so what I want to do is progressively, get a little bit more advanced. So here, what I want to do is I want to create a new workspace. So at this point, let's go ahead and create a new workspace. And then we're going to call a import.pbix. And this is basically, going to, allow us to basically take a PBIX file that we have and basically push it up programmatically. And so, the code that we just ran for this, if I go back here, is create workspace and import PBIX. We'll look at that in just a second, but let's go back here. And, if we do a refresh, do we have tenant 3? Yes, we do. Have we uploaded, the PBIX file? Yes, we have. And, note that at this point, I just did the import of the PBIX. So I'm just going to see whatever data was in that PBIX file. But now we got to go a little bit further, than what we've done so far. Okay. But, here, what I wanted to kind of show is that, as I import a PBIX file, there is a PBI client imports post import with file in group. And that basically allows us to push up the file. Now, what's really important here is I want to kind of point out some code, and it's this code right here. Because when you choose the post import file group, it doesn't wait until the operation is done. It returns back to you immediately. So then what you need to do is you need to call imports get import in group, pass the import ID. And if the import state is still publishing, it means it's not done yet. So it will eventually be succeeded. But it starts at publishing and then it either moves to exceeded or failed. So once again, typically we want to do something afterwards. And if you don't have this kind of blocking mechanism, to make sure you synchronously finish the job before going on to the next task, you'll basically get into trouble there. Okay, now let's say I want to update a SQL connection. So here's something where once we've got the data set in question, we can go to datasets, get data sources in group, and it returns back a list of data sources, and I need to set those credentials. Now, in this example right here, we're not setting credentials yet. This one just kind of shows an example of how to change a connection string. If you haven't used parameters, but you just hard-coded a connection string inside there, there is basically a way to do it by calling update data sources in group. And you can kind of see, how things are laid out here. Now, what's going to be more important and what is going to be kind of a central point of the code that I'm going to keep showing, as we go through, is basically patching data source credentials. So here we call get data sources in group. And now we're going to look at each data source. And in this case, it's a PBIX file with a single database. So it's got a single data source, but we just might want to check to make sure, it's a SQL data source. Now, what confuses everybody is that this is an Azure SQL data source. It doesn't have to go through a gateway. No on-premises gateway needs to be installed. Great. However, once you get to the code, you still need the gateway ID. So there's something that we call the cloud gateway. And that's when you don't need an actual gateway. you still have this gateway ID that's particular to your environment you need to get. And that gives you kind of the ability to kind of call update data source. And the idea is that if we have a direct query PBIX file that we upload, you've got to basically patch the data source credentials or it won't work at all. We have import models. We have to patch the data source credentials before we can run another refresh operation. Okay, now let's go back here. And I've got a couple different things inside here. In fact, I've got one little thing that I'm going to call here, and that is delete all workspaces. So just to kind of show you what that does. That's simply going to enumerate through all the workspaces, that's owned by this particular user. If the workspace is there, it's just going to delete them. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to call this method called onboard new client. And let's say that I have to automate this process of standing up a bunch of workspaces for these customers. And so, now what we're going to do, is we're going to look at the code in Dataset Manager, and let's close all this down. And now let's go to onboard new tenant. Okay, so as I run the code right here, and I think what I forgot to do is to come back here and to get rid of this. But now we're going to be running number 4. Okay. Now, once again, this is a automation process right here. And do I have the wrong one inside there for delete all workspaces? Okay, and now we're hitting something where if there's already, something of that name, there's this issue that came up since they added things for the XML endpoint. And that is if you use a name that has already been used, it will fail, even if you don't have permissions to query and see that workspace name. Okay, so I've got myself into a little pickle here. And so what I'm going to do quickly, is let's go to the admin portal. And now, inside of the admin portal, if I look at the workspaces, and now let's just look at the ones that are, active. So I can see right here, here's this issue, and I think I can fix that because I created these with something else. But let me go back to dataset manager service principal dot delete all workspaces. So I'm guessing that there's things that have been created by this party down here. Okay, now I should have done something different, but let's do this. Let me go to access. And certainly I did not mean to get into this, but let's go ahead and just kind of quickly solve it by adding myself as an administrator, because as I do that, it will then give me the ability to delete these. Okay, and how many do we have? We just have 3 or 4. Okay, once again, let me just kind of get through this so then I can show you the code that I thought was impressive until it failed in front of you. Okay, almost there. Let's go back here to access. And once we get to access right here, and now I am an admin of all these. And then finally, this guy down here, edit. And let's go back here to access. Okay, almost there. And admin. And now my user account, is the owner of all these workspaces that are creating a problem. So let's see if I can now go back here and just kind of delete them so I don't have this problem. And now they're deleted. Okay, so my apologies. I think we're back on track here. So now we're going to basically run this code, that's going to kind of go through this process, of creating a whole bunch of new workspaces. And so now we're kind of going through this process of uploading the PBIX file And then it has data set parameters, so I can point it to a different database. After that, we patch the data source credentials. Then we start a data set refresh operation, and then we're basically finished. And what we can see here is, by the time that this code completes, I should be able to come back here, and what we've just created is basically 4 new workspaces. If I go to Acme Corp and we open up this report, it basically is the exact same report, same data set, just data for different customers. So that's the one for Acme Corp. Let's go ahead and look at Contoso and open that. And once again, it's just about having a PBIX file, that has the data set parameters. Now, if I go back to resources here, and we have the sales report template, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of quickly open this thing up in Power BI Desktop, just to kind of show you, how you would set something like this up. So everything lives in the query window. So first of all, we go to Manage Parameters, and we create a database server, a database name, and it has a parameter type of text. And then when I look at my queries that actually call to the database, let's bring them up in the advanced editor. Notice that I don't use hard-coded strings, but instead we use basically those parameter values. Okay. And then as I move over here and we go ahead and look at the dataset manager, you can see that, here we import the PBIX file, and remember, looping and making sure that job is finished before you move on is important. And now we're going to update those data set parameters. And now we're going to call that patch SQL credentials. So we basically set those. And now we're going to refresh. That basically kicks off a refresh job. Okay. And once again, if I open this up and now we run this one more time, I've tried to make this so, I can just kind of keep running it in a test environment. So basically it starts by deleting all those. But once again, over here, you can see exactly how things work. Here we're basically uploading the PBIX file. Here what you can see, if I look at the JSON that's coming back, we've created the PBIX file. Is it finished? No, it's publishing. And then finally, the last call, it doesn't say publishing anymore. It basically says succeeded. And once again, it's just all a series of calls, into the Power BI REST API, to basically get the outcome that you'd like. Okay, so let's keep going. Now, if you want to do the exact same thing as Service Principal, it's fairly easy to do. And the only thing that's different is that, well, we get a access token for the Service Principal, either using a client secret or a client certificate. Let's not get that far into that. But once you get back the access token for the Service Principal, it has no permissions inside of it. So everything about permissions that I showed before only has to do with user tokens. When we deal with Service Principals, what we have to do is we have to make sure that Power BI is configured to allow the Service Principal to call in, and that the Service Principal is either an admin or a member on any workspace that it uses. Now, to set this thing up, typically you go up into Azure AD and you create a new security group. I'm going to call it Power BI Apps. Then up in the Power BI tenant admin setting, you have to enable a developer setting that allows the Power BI, or allows Service Principals, that are in this Power BI Apps group to call the API. Okay. Now, also, when we create an app for Service Principal up in Azure AD, you just need to create it type equals web, but you do not need a redirect URL. Generally web, when you create an application Azure AD, means it's a confidential client that can have a secret, like a client secret. But you don't need a redirect URL because that's only for user authentication, never for Service Principal authentication. Okay, so you'll go ahead and create either client secret or a client certificate. And remember, no need to configure any permissions. But then what gets to be important is the app has to go in that security group, so it won't fail when it tries to call, into the Power BI REST API. And then also what you'll see is that service principals aren't treated special. Once you set up support so they can call into the Power BI REST API, just like any user, they can't see any workspace that's already been created unless you add it as a member. So typically if you create a workspace and then you add the service principal as a member, it can talk to it. Now, what we're going to do is that, let's go back up here. And I want to go back up into Power BI for a second. And up in Power BI, let's go back to the admin portal. And up in the admin portal, let's go to tenant settings. And the first thing I kind of showed you is that you have to come down here to the developer settings, and we'll basically specify that they can call the API. Okay, let me just also call out, since I'm here, there's a new preview. Before this preview, when you run as service principal, you couldn't call any of the as admin APIs. And so now there's preview support. So basically if you enable this and have a security group and put your app in it, you can call the read-only admin APIs, but there is no support for service principals doing any admin level updating as of now. But what I wanted to kind of say here is, let's go up to the top. And also, at the tenant settings up at the top, we have workspace settings. Who can create a workspace? So one thing that gets to be really clean is if you give a service principal the ability to create a workspace, it can create a workspace and it's automatically the admin. So there's no assignment, of permissions. So in this sample back here, let's say that I get back here and we kind of take a look at the service principal class. Just about the only difference here is that when we call the token manager, we're asking it to give us a app only service principal based access token. But basically all the other code's the same, including this onboard tenant. So let's do this. Let's go back, and first thing that I'm going to do here is let's go ahead and delete all the workspaces that are there. Okay, and so we should have no workspaces, but now, let's go back and, inside of the service API, let's call demo 7. And so in this case right here, this is the exact same code. It's just we're going to be using a service principal oriented access token. Okay, so let's go back up here. Let's go ahead and comment that out and go ahead and run this right here. And now the exact same thing's happening. Now, in this code, I did one extra thing to make the demo a little bit more understandable. So if I go back up here and I look at onboard tenant, here we're going to do a couple things. First of all, we're going to create a workspace, and let's say there's another workspace that has the same name as this will fail. And so now here's kind of showing how we can do exception handling. And, if the error message of Power BI entity already exists, it just kind of tacks, something on the end. And still, is able to create that, But what I wanted to look at down here is that, after creating the workspace, you could go ahead and add the user, in. And once again, once this onboarding process, is complete, if I come back here and now I don't see any workspaces, once again, because I'm a user. They're all owned by the service principal. Now let's say that I go down here one more time to the admin portal. And because I am an admin, I can go to workspaces and see one of these workspaces that's just been created. Okay, so let's get all the active ones like Wingtip. Let me go ahead and, add myself, to that particular workspace right here, just so I can kind of show you what's going on inside. Okay, so now I've added myself to that workspace. And so I should now be able to go to that workspace. And here's the data set. And here's something that was completely created by a service principal. And just to prove that, let's go behind here. And you can see, who is the owner of the data set. You can kind of see, it is the app, and there's the app ID. And you can see that a refresh succeeded inside there. So once again, if you want to work with service principal, you can see that it's completely possible to create workspaces, upload data, PBIX files, and patch the data set and get everything working. Okay. Now, as we go through here, do we have any questions at this point? I realize that I've been talking pretty quickly and ignoring questions, Kelly. Let me see if we have anything.
Yes, we do have a few questions actually that I didn't want to interrupt. So let's start from the beginning. So let's go to the top, and we have when was the AAD connector introduced, and how is it different from the basic OAuth process? No more app registration required? That's a question, and that's from Lutz.
Yes, no. So the AAD connector, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the AAD connector, but there's the OAuth process in back. And there is a library, which is Microsoft Identity.client that I'm using behind the scenes to get access tokens, but it's going through the exact same OAuth process. Okay, I can see those questions too here.
Oh, okay.
So when a data set is in import mode, taking all data from Power BI data flows, push Power service using service principal, as the data source is cloud-based, do you need to sign in manually going to the dataset properties?
Is that? Yeah.
You never need to sign in manually. There are some issues with service principal, and I believe one is importing a data flow. I knew that was an issue about 2 months ago. I'm not sure if that's been fixed, but you should be able to do everything as service principal, and therefore you should have no need to log in manually. And one of the things that you're able to do is even when you create a new workspace as service principal, you can then start adding in either individual users as admin, or you can add in an Azure AD group, so a certain set of humans can almost log in, and see those particular data sets. Okay. There's a question here. Can you please cover selective partition refresh? And we just don't have enough. I'm going to show one example that kind of shows a little bit of that, but partition refresh is a little bit too low level. But next month when we have Michael Kowalski, I think that will be one of the topics, because he's really going to kind of get into advanced data modeling with the tabular editor. Awesome. So I would look to that.
And there's another one. Can you please cover API call pagination, for example, get groups as admin, fetch the first 100, then the next 100, etc.
With that, they have something, which is a skip token. Mm-hmm. So you're able to basically make the call, and then you get back a token that you use in the next call to give you the next set of rows, and you're able to sequentially move through something. Okay, I think probably let me jump back into the programs. A bit more material that we want to cover. We haven't even gotten to what I told everyone was the exciting part, which is tabular object model.
Just before you get that, let's just clarify it. Its gateway connection is also updated by parameters. So publish change parameter to test/prod data source is dependent on the parameter. Then use the bind gateway API. Yes,
if you were going to involve gateways, you would absolutely need the bind gateway API, as opposed to what I'm using here. You wouldn't use dataset parameters in the same way, if you have to bind it to a gateway. Okay. So that's absolutely right.
Thanks, Rakesh. Thank you.
Okay, so what is the tabular object model, or what we call TOM? It's a new way to manipulate or read dataset definitions through the XMLA endpoint. So the XMLA endpoint, for a while, has given developers, access to SQL Server analysis, tabular databases, and multidimensional databases. And now it can give us, the ability to communicate with datasets in Power BI. And tools like SQL Server Management Studio and the Tabular Editor are common tools. But now we have an API that allows us just to basically start programming directly against datasets. Now, the XMLA endpoint is a little aged. It's still, mainstream, but the technology used is SOAP, not REST. So luckily, when you use Tom, you don't have to deal with any of that. Basically all the, plumbing below the tabular object model library, deals with creating the SOAP requests and sending them to the endpoint and dealing with the response. One little caveat here is currently, I'm going to show you some examples of how to create data sets and manipulate data sets with Tom. When you do that, you can no longer download the PBIX file, from the Power BI service. And in effect, you make the data set and any PBIX file you could derive from it incompatible with the Power BI desktop. So hopefully that won't go on for too much longer, but it's something to definitely consider. Now, the tabular object model has this object hierarchy, and up the top we have a server. And server to us means workspace. And then you have a database with a model, and the database and the model are both really the data set. But within the data set, you can see tables, you can enumerate through the tables, then the columns, you could add tables, so we're going to see some examples of that, as we go. Note that to use Tom, you have to be in a workspace in a dedicated capacity. So unlike all the other demos, this one, first of all, you need to have, either premium or an A SKU, or you can also use premium per user. Note that if you use premium per user, you can talk to this with a user token. But if you want to be able to do Tom programming with a service principal, you basically need an A SKU, a P SKU, or an EM SKU to create the dedicated capacity for your workspace. So PPU, premium per user, will not let the service principal talk to Tom. Now, the other thing is you need to get a connection. And there's this idea of, let's go back here and, let's go to workspaces and we'll call this something like the Tom demo. And so once I create this, I've got this workspace right here. Let's go to settings. I've just created a trial and I have premium per user. So notice that it's going to give me a premium per user, and then I will have a workspace connection. Okay, so I'm going to take that workspace connection, and the way I've set up this demo right here is that somewhere we have a workspace connection. Here it is. And the other thing about Tom is that once again, I told you it is possible to use a either a user token or a service principal token. Okay, now there's lots of different ways to work with Tom as far as how to initialize it. But here, what I'm going to show you is we're just getting the exact same access token that I was getting for the Power BI REST API. And then we're going to create this thing called the server, and then we have this connect string inside there. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is just kind of get hello world done. And so if I go back to program, and let's go ahead and comment this out, and let's go now down to Tom. And so here, I want to display the databases. So remember my connection string kind of points to a workspace. Let's go up here. And so here, if I want to display the databases, you can see that server, once again, think of that as your workspace. I want to enumerate through the databases. You think of that as your data sets. So let's go back. And one thing that we're going to have to do before we can do this is let's upload at least one new data set. Okay, so basically we'll take our favorite Northwind Retro and we'll load that in. Okay, so now I have basically one data set inside. And so, given that, and if I have changed this to demo number 8, let's go ahead and run that inside here. And what we should be able to do, is enumerate through. And, what you can see here is that, and I just deleted that at the end. But, what you saw there, is that I was able to start getting information about the database, such as, what's its compatibility mode, what's its estimated size. one thing you can't get from the Power BI REST API is, how big your data set is. Okay. I just want to do 2 more quick demos right here. And I think I just, okay, let's go back here. And I will one more time create something called Tom demo. And with that, one more time, I'm going to upload a PBIX file, for this example right here. And so what I want to do this in this next example is, back here, we just basically displayed the database information. I might want to display more information about the database, or, let's say that in our case, I want to display more information about the tables or something like that. So you can kind of see here, that I can get the data set in question, and then I can find the tables inside, and even down to the point where I can see the M code behind the partitions. Now, what I want to do is I kind of want to end with one more example here. And so in our particular example, let's go ahead and comment that out. And so the one we're going to do is we're going to basically create a new wingtip sales model. So here's an example of basically walking up to a workspace and creating a whole data set from scratch. Okay, so let's go back and make sure we're running demo number 10 right here. And so as this thing runs, it's going to take a second to run. Let's kind of walk through this code. And so what I have here is something which is create wingtip sales model. And when we run that right here, it's going to start creating these table objects. Let's kind of look at one of those tables. So for instance, we want to create the customers table. So here's an example of creating a new table. It's named customers. And there's this notion of partitions. So a table doesn't just have queries behind it. A table has one or more partitions, and the partitions are where the query lives. So for the customers table right here, the way I've set up this demo, is that we have some code for the customers table. Here's the customers query. And the idea is I'm just taking this M code and I'm injecting it, right at runtime, into the table I'm creating, and then we'll create a set of data columns. You can even create things like hierarchies. Okay, so, I want you to kind of play around with this code, but what you can see here is that we create these tables, we add the table to the data model that we've just created, and now we're going to add relationships right here. Now, if I go back over here, and, let's go to our workspace right here, and, as I refresh the workspace, what we should see here. It looks like this is still in motion right there. Actually, let me try that one more time to run that. But what you can see, is that the whole database, is going to get created. The whole data set gets created from scratch. Now there is a article that I have that kind of steps through working with Tom. But the idea that I would like to, add a table to a data model, or I want to add new measures programmatically, gets to, give us new potential. One demo I wanted to run, but I ran out of time with, is if you upload a data set, one of the things that you're able to do with Tom is to find a table, find a partition, and rewrite the M code, and basically just replace the M code, in a data set. And the reason we had this was that we had a customer that wanted local Excel users to basically be working with Excel files that were local. And then they wanted to upload those Excel files and redirect them to Excel files that were in ADFS. And so, the problem there was that you had to kind of configure data source credentials for the local source, even though it wasn't there anymore. So the solution that we came up with And let me go into Tom and just kind of show this one thing. And I know we're running out of time. I can hear you just about to pull the cane and pull me off the stage. So let me just kind of walk through this one last piece right here, where we update a table query. So here's code that's able to, once you find a table, you can find the partitions. If it has a single partition behind it, there's the M code. And then I just kind of had a replacement substitution where you're replacing the M code. And then all of a sudden, the data source for that local thing disappears. You patch the credentials and things start working again. Okay, so I think at this point now, we have gotten, to the end. I'm not sure if you think there's time to still address some of these questions, Kelly. What should we do here?
We could go for another 3 more minutes, I think, but we do have a ton of questions, and maybe the ones that we don't get to, we'll have you answer through the community or through the blog posts. So
yeah, that sounds good. And which is I'm looking through the questions here. Do you want to, or should we just commit to me writing up, taking the questions that have good answers?
Yeah, I think
we'll have a follow-up blog post for that. That's a lot cleaner, and then I'll have more time to give answers and kind of point to other things in my demo.
Okay, that'd be great. And then maybe just letting everyone know that the recording will be available by about Tuesday, I think, on the YouTube channel, Tuesday or Wednesday at the very latest. We just have to get it closed captioned. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining. And Ted, thank you, as always, for a super informative session. You're amazing. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for both of you and Daniel for doing all the stuff to make this work as well as it does. So thank you. Have a wonderful evening, morning, weekend, everyone. And thanks a lot for joining us. Take care. Bye. Cheers.